Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this Tête-à-tête DOCU Days UA. My name is Vladan Petkovic, and today with us we have the director of Wintopia, Mira Burt-Wintonick. Welcome, Mira.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for the film. It's really beautiful and very touching and also funny. So let's start by you telling us when you decided to make this film out of these tapes that your father made.
Yeah, so right before my dad passed away, he was sick for a couple months, and he started talking about wanting to make this final film about his life and about all of his work and his passions. And he just died a lot quicker than we thought he would, and so we didn't have time to actually start filming that film. So after he passed away, I still wanted to kind of try to honor that dying wish of having a film made about him and his life. And I remembered he had always been talking about these Utopia tapes that he had been filming for 15 years. And I knew they were in the basement in these boxes, but nobody had ever seen the tapes that I knew of. I had never seen them. He had stopped working on that film many years before. And so I thought that since we didn't have any new material that we could get with him, that I could use those tapes and that search for Utopia as a portrait of his life and of our relationship. And that was the starting point of what became a much more personal film than I thought it would be.
So can you maybe introduce us to how this process went for you? And certainly it's special when you're making a film about someone very close to you. So it's both biographical and autobiographical. And so how did you juggle all these things?
Yeah, I mean, I started off trying to make the film that he would have made with those tapes. I was working with an editor as well at the time who knew my dad, and we would just started watching the tapes. So that was a very intense process because I had, normally when someone dies, you don't really get any new moments with them, but all of a sudden I had 200 hours or so of new moments of my dad. And he's not on camera that often in the tapes, but every once in a while he would turn the camera on himself, or even just seeing his shadow and his reflection was very emotional. But in the creative sense, I was still trying to figure out what the film he was going to make was. Sometimes the tapes, his handwriting is just very chaotic, so I couldn't read the labels on the tapes. So I didn't know why he was there, where he was, what it had to do with Utopia. And I just would have to Google if I saw a sign in the background. I would feel, oh, that's where Gandhi was born or something, to figure out, what did this have to do with Utopia and what he was up to. So the whole first draft of the film was really me trying to make that film about Utopia, about his feelings about Utopia and all the places he went. And it took me a few years to kind of realize that I couldn't make that film, that it was much he could have made a good film out of those tapes, but I had to make the film that only I could make, which was a much more personal film, and putting myself more in the film and making it more about our relationship and a father-daughter story. And still the Utopia is one layer of it, but I had to kind of create a few more layers that make it more of a personal film.
Yeah. So how does this? How did this? What did this have on you? I mean, this is. I'm sure you went through a lot of different emotions when doing this. So what was, maybe some of this was inspiring and some of these were obstacles?
Yeah, I enjoyed the challenge and to have a creative project. When you're in the middle of an intense grieving phase, it was kind of helpful to have a creative process to filter that experience through. At the same time, it was very painful to just be every day going into this dark editing room and watching footage of my dead dad. It was, I don't think that's a normal way that you would grieve a parent, is to just immerse yourself so much in thinking about them every day, all day. So I can't tell, I've never done it any other way than the way I did it. So I can't tell what it would have felt like to just have a calmer or somehow more distant relationship with my grief in that time, less intense. But I think in the long run, it was helpful to kind of address a lot of maybe the conflicts that I had internally with my relationship with my dad. It helped me, making the film really did help me kind of understand him better and feel closer to him after his death. So in the long run, it was, I think, very rewarding, but also very, there was ups and downs. And, I say in the film that there was a part where I took 2 years off and couldn't watch the film, couldn't look at the film or think about it, and didn't, just took a full 2 years of not working on it at all, which I think was very important, just to have time to step back and come back to it later with fresh eyes of what I wanted to do with it.
Yeah. And you are also, you are present in the film in different ways. I mean, as a filmmaker who is now making their own version of these tapes, but also you are in the film itself as a kid when your dad films you. So when you were younger, how aware were you of what his job is and what is it he's doing and why is he not home so much?
I mean, I knew he was a filmmaker, and I think at the time I thought that was cool. Like when I was a kid, I thought that was like kind of a cool job to have. But I was way too young to appreciate what his films were about. I remember getting dragged to the premieres of Manufacturing Consent that was screening in all these universities, to these huge sold out rooms full of students and people. And I would watch the first half hour because I have a little cameo in that film when I was about 6. And then I would kind of get bored and I didn't care about Noam Chomsky or any of that stuff. But then as I got older, of course, and I started studying film and became more interested in documentary, I started to really appreciate his work and how valuable it was. But there was a conflict. I mean, I didn't fully understand the balance that he gave to his work versus to his family. So I think only making the film did I fully kind of appreciate. In talking to his friends and interviewing people for the film, that's when I got a fuller sense of how important he really was to the documentary film community as a mentor and championing young filmmakers, and just what he was actually up to when he wasn't making films, just his whole role in the international community.
And did you, when you started realizing that this was important work that he did and all these, that he had contact with all these significant people, and how did this influence you? Did you, for instance, when you were a kid, you had no idea who Chomsky was, but then later obviously you knew. And then how does it influence you personally in the sense of what you want to do with your career and in which field you want to go?
Yeah, so I mean, my regular career is making radio documentaries. I make audio documentaries and audio fictions. And I'm usually a lot more interested in personal storytelling rather than social issue kind of storytelling that his films were more drawn to. Although he told those social issues through personal stories and characters, but definitely making this film makes me think a bit more about how to merge those two things. And some of my work is personal storytelling, but that, about a character or someone who's going through where it relates to a larger social issue. So it does definitely, that's something that I really respect about him, is that all of his work was really working towards this goal of trying to wake people up to what is going on in the world outside of their own bubbles and to the lives that some people are living that are, a lot harder than ours. So that's something that I keep trying to keep in mind after making this film, is how to use my own work to somehow touch on different, maybe more relevant issues.
Yeah. And also what the film implies, but also shows near the end, is that there seems to be a sort of a gap in perception between how you saw your relationship with your father and how he saw it and interpreted to other people.
The distinction, the gap between how we each saw our relationship. Is that what
yeah, it seems that on one hand, your father really loved you and thought that you were, and was telling people that you were the center of his world, but that you yourself did not really see it that way.
Yeah, after he died, a lot of people told me, "Oh, he talked about you all the time. You know, he was so proud of you." And that wasn't something he told me that often. It was something, but it was still very nice to hear that he was, when he was traveling, he was still thinking about us back home. But yeah, I think he maybe because he lost his own father quite young. I'm not sure how he knew, like, how he interpreted the role of fatherhood, or I think for him it was one of the he was such an independent person, like, and from a very young age, probably because he, you know, his father died and his mom was working a lot, and that's something that, you know, made him develop this huge intellect, and just like he really, you know, just read and just became very self-sufficient in a lot of ways. And I think that maybe he saw the role of a father was really to push your kid to become just really independent as well and self-sufficient, and which of course is part of parenting. But I think maybe it's it he took that to a bit of an extreme sometimes. It was kind of he somehow, especially when I started making films, I thought our relationship was a bit more like the way he would mentor other young filmmakers, which is like a great role for a mentor. But when it's your dad, you kind of just want him to like support what you do and not necessarily be pushing you so hard towards making things better. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough, I don't have any kids, so I can't imagine how tough a job it is to try to be a good parent. But
Yeah, that's pretty complex. I mean, I had a dad who was similar to yours in your approach to me and my sister, but I don't have kids either, so I don't know how this translates. You tried to be a parent yourself, so yeah. All right, so let's go a bit back into the film itself, and what really stands out and is this image of this causeway towards this holy island, which is in Northumberland, if I understood correctly. So why is it that you go back to it? So it's I think repeated 4 times in the film. It seems to be a strong symbol for you, and it is
yeah,
a powerful image with this water over the road. And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it seemed like a real metaphor for his persistence towards utopia, or towards searching for a better world. I mean, him in the tapes, as I was watching them, he really was drawn to like the symbols of water and wind and air. Like those were two kind of visual metaphors, I guess, that were really present in the tapes. And you know, he was sort of chasing windmills throughout all the tapes. Like Don Quixote is like one of his inspirations, and that's one of the guides in the film is this Quixote, this quixotic quest. So there's one moment where he pretends to be a windmill, and he's kind of like trying to channel the wind, and he's always filming birds. And that to me, I kept thinking about these creatures that can hover above, but they don't really know where they want to land. They're kind of floating around, but they have this view of everything that's a very unique perspective that we don't get, which seemed like a good way to think about him and his life. And then the water was, again, like his other kind of creative guide in the film and in the tapes was Saint Brendan, this this Irish monk from the 6th century, who was the first or one of the first utopians, in the sense of looking for utopia like right on earth, rather than this idea of paradise that, you know, religions say, oh, when you die you can have access to this amazing world. But Saint Brendan actually said, actually no, why shouldn't we have that now? Why should we wait till we're dead? Like, we should have a good life now. So he actually went searching for an island, a holy island where you could have a paradise on earth. And so that was one of Peter's inspirations for his utopian journey as well. And so yeah, he came to this causeway in, I think it's somewhere in the UK, and it says Holy Island, and there's a warning not to cross at certain times because the water covers the road. And he's clearly arrived at the wrong time and hadn't, wasn't aware of that when he arrived. And he's waiting by the water. And I guess throughout the film, I kind of wanted to use that as a different return to that image as you're learning more about him and his quest. You're kind of wondering, like, how far is he going to go with this? Is he going to cross? Is this a barrier? And just thinking about utopia and all the barriers that we all face in terms of trying to make the world better in our societies, like, the whole thing about utopia is that it's this impossible place. So there's these barriers that are preventing us from getting there. And you know, at what point do we give up, and do we feel defeat, and do we decide not to try to achieve a better world? So it's kind of all of those things in like this one image that I found very powerful.
Yeah.
And it kind of evolves throughout the film, like how you interpret that image, I guess, as you're learning different things about my dad or about Utopia.
Yes, and it seems that this Saint Brendan seems to be a strange character in this Christian tradition, because this is almost sort of a heresy, like looking for paradise on earth when we should be welcome into heaven after we die, and so on. It's also, to me, similar to the spirit of Don Quixote, that there is this. These are like strong characters who are considered crazy in a way by the mainstream, if we can put it that way, but they are pushing on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked the St. Brendan. I didn't know about St. Brendan before. I mean, I knew my dad had wanted to make a whole film about St. Brendan, and I had never really paid attention to it. And as I was like watching the tapes and learning about him, I thought it was just an interesting way to think about utopians as like these kind of rebels that they're refusing like the status quo and the way that we're expected, or we're told that we should be satisfied with things a certain way. And they're saying, no, like they're asking the question of why can things be better? And yeah, I thought that was a really inspiring way to think about it. It
seems that, I mean, your father saw himself in this way too. And what was interesting and also touching and maybe a little bit mysterious, it creates this strange feeling in the viewer, I think, when it said that, when you said that your father said that when he finds this utopia, he will send you postcards, but there was never any invitation to go there with him. So how does this make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like a joke that he would always say, and he would tell other people that too, that I found out after when I spoke to people about it. They said, oh yeah, he always talking about sending a postcard when he would get there. And so he didn't mean it in a personal way, but of course, thinking on it, it does seem odd that you wouldn't want to bring your family with you to this perfect place. And I mean, towards the end of the film, I use a moment that I found of him, my dad talking to Eduardo Galeano, the writer, and he says, my dad off camera says, oh, you know, what is your definition of utopia? Because for me, I know that I'm going to end my film by going back home to my family, and that's going to be the answer to my film about utopia. And that he filmed that, you know, 20 years ago or something. And so he knew, even as he was making the film, or this film that he never finished, that the ending to that story in a film would be to find utopia at home with your family. And yet, even though he knew that enough to like tell the person that that was how his film was going to end, he still didn't actually want to sort of settle down and stay put. So it was an interesting pull, I guess, between him and this restlessness that kept him wanting to keep working and to keep searching. And even though he knew that there was some element of happiness at home that he was missing out on.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And there is also this, which is another thing that creates a bit of a mystery. Like, okay, he's not always alone. Who is he with? Who is filming him? Because if he's not put it on a tripod and filming himself, yeah, we don't know who he is with.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, he had so many friends around the world. Like at every film festival, he had all these different families of friends and other filmmakers. So I'm guessing he was with, there's lots of moments in the footage, yeah, where I don't know who he's with or who's filming him. And it was interesting to try to figure that out and just figure out what these other relationships were that he had.
Yeah, and okay, let me just check something else. Yes, he also had this idea for a virtual film festival in 1996, and we are now taking part in one. So he kind of foreshadowed this. This is a nice coincidence, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, it was like in the 90s. It's kind of like, I guess, before, inventing Netflix before the internet was fast enough to accommodate any kind of streaming, but he him and a few friends, they created a virtual film festival to try to get filmmakers to dialogue around their films. I can't tell if I'm frozen or you're frozen. Oh, did I freeze?
It's all right now. Yeah, you froze for a second, yeah. But it's
okay. When talking about how slow the internet was in the 90s, it froze.
Well, all these coincidences mean that we are on the world and met all these this inspire you to do the same, or you would rather, there are different ways people react to what their parents do and what they expect from them? So, for instance, like, no wonder that Oz to bring gun and nut. So, like this is a counter effect of if parents are traditional, then children will be the other way around. So, how are you? I except audio expression.
I think I'm frozen. Sorry, I think I was frozen again. You were asking about a parent's work and following in their footsteps versus rebelling against what they do, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter never wanted me to be a filmmaker. He always talked about how hard it was to take the vow of poverty, which he took as a documentary filmmaker, and he wanted me to be like a musician or an architect or something. But I think I guess I grew up with just watching documentaries and also seeing how much impact his films had, and just kind of, I guess, couldn't help but get interested at some point. And I guess by doing radio is like my way of not following exactly in his footsteps, doing radio documentaries instead. But I guess I just fell in love with the art form of storytelling through nonfiction.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you are not that interested in these issues that he was, like environment and social issues and so on, not directly at least. So what is it that inspires you?
Well, I guess I am interested in all those issues, but I had never sort of devoted my specific creative work to tackling those issues. It was just something on the side. Whereas my work, what inspires me, I guess, is just in my radio work, talking to people about their emotions. Like, I'm really interested in emotional work, just how people feel, and in ways that surrounding complicated things that they don't talk about, like grief or like just complicated human relationships. So I'm always more interested in, I guess, the personal aspect than the bigger topic. But I do like it when those two things intertwine and you can maybe tell a larger story through a personal lens. But I'm very... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
No, but I guess I am very inspired by like the work that someone like my dad does, or someone who does apply an artistic or creative lens to something that also has like some kind of social impact without being didactic. I think that was the important thing with my dad too, is a lot of his films really use humor and they're telling important issues, but they're not trying to be lecturing and like, it's just too heavy. A lot of documentaries, he would always say, is just how heavy they are, and trying to put humor and using creativity to tell those serious stories.
Yeah, he was a funny guy. He's always joking and a bit of a kind of a clown, but you can tell that he's he seems like someone who thinks about serious things, but keeps this childish kind of spirit, which I think is very important and for artists. And but what would be your what kind of artists, filmmakers you like I mean, from, let's say, the documentary field? What are the recent? What do you like to watch now?
When I was working on this film, I tried to watch other people's personal films to figure out how they did made them. And I rewatched like Sherman's March a few times, which is like the personal film. Well, it becomes a personal film. It sets out to be this film about a Civil War general, and it becomes this like personal film about the filmmaker's love life and dating life. And it's so funny. And I love that film. I love Camera Person, which also was really inspiring to me making this film, which is about a documentary filmmaker's. It's sort of a portrait of her work, but without any narration, just using the outtakes from all the other films she made over her career. And it's really beautiful and powerful, even though there's not really a explicit story. It's just like the outtakes of seeing what she's interested in filming. You just get to know so much about her behind the camera. So that was really inspiring for this film, where I was trying to make a portrait of the person behind the camera as well. Am I frozen? Are you frozen?
To me, you are frozen, but now you're okay. Yeah, okay. Do you hear me? I'm not sure.
I can hear you.
I'm getting a message. My connection is unstable again. So I hope it works, and I hope the studio can tell me if something's wrong. So what I want to say, it's. Do you find it maybe difficult to express why is it okay? I will start again. We'll throw this question away. So I think that filmmakers kind of these influences maybe prefer not to show them very clearly. Inspired them and how.
Sorry, people are. I would miss that. People don't want to talk about what inspired them.
With filmmaking, they don't like to say explicitly, okay, this has influenced me in this way or not, and that be trying to as a journalist and film critic, I have then I love cinema, but I also have this need to dig stuff out that people don't want to say. And then sometimes I get a feeling that they would rather how they put it in a way,
like that they're they don't want to admit that they're influenced by other people's work, or
maybe.
I mean, I think it's impossible to not be influenced by what you watch or what you listen to, and I don't think you should try to be. I mean, I guess if you have such a very original thing to say, it's interesting to try to think of new ways to say it that haven't been done before, but there's also so many beautiful things to borrow from other art forms or from other people's work in just a way that seems very natural to, be influenced by with someone doing something in a way that is inspiring or creative, or just makes you stop and like changes the way you see things. Like, of course, it's going to inform how you approach your own work. Not to say that you should be I guess the boring aspect is if it becomes formulaic and you're trying to just have one thing that influences you. But if you spread your web of influences to so many things, then it'll become something new just in the collage.
Yeah, I think so too. We have some audience. So I'll read this first one up for you. What is your understanding of utopia? Did you find your own utopia when working on the film?
I guess, I mean, I think it definitely made me think about all the different ideas of utopia as I was making the film. My dad went to places like an eco-village. So that was really, to me, that kind of small scale thinking of environmentally sustainable, community-based living was really inspiring. And he went to he explored all kinds of different utopias that didn't make it into the film necessarily. Like he goes to the squatters commune in Denmark and Christiania in Copenhagen, and just that idea of kind of that society that sort of rejects the idea of private property, I think is also very inspiring and interesting to incorporate into some kind of future society that we work towards. Just kind of basically the very basic thing of the idea of utopia that makes sense is trying to think of a world that just would be more equal. I mean, that's such a basic, the 101 kind of thing, but that's still something that we haven't figured out in all the thousands of years we've been making our societies. So, just thinking about the idea of borders, especially now we're all in this time of being trapped and having so many freedoms revoked in terms of travel. And there are people that live their lives like that way before this, pandemic, where they don't have passports or they're not allowed. Their country is a very difficult place to live, so they're seeking a place to live. So those kinds of things, I think a utopia would look like something that just, had a lot less borders or restrictions, or a lot less your quality of life wouldn't be so determined by the fluke of where you happen to be born,
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess, the film sort of explores the idea that utopia isn't really a place. It's about using art or using the way we communicate to just, even though we might never get to that perfect society, just using art or anything to like kind of using our imagination basically to try to think of ways to like push our society a bit closer towards that perfect ideal image that we might never get to. So I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think right now this situation that we are in has kind of made all these differences much more stark and much clearer, and that it's on one hand it's scary because we see even more clearly how divided we are, and especially in some sort of class sense. And but on the other hand, it feels like it could be an opportunity, because we are discovering these things which are now much clearer, that it could be an opportunity to build something better. But I'm afraid that our experience, at least since people about our age have been alive, is that the world is always going in the completely different direction from what we've been taught that are the right values when we were young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting working on this film because my dad, he was a realist and he was cynical in a lot of ways, but he also was really sort of optimistic, or he at least understood the value of hope and how important it is to try to generate hope, and that it's like you can create hope in other people through actions, and that the more hope you can create in other people, the more actions they'll go out and do. Whereas I'm I find a much more cynical person, or I find it hard to feel hopeful about the world. And maybe it's just like a generational thing. Like he grew up kind of more in with the 60s, and there was so many in the 70s of just so many changes and so much progress being made, whereas it seems like there's a lot of things that are going backwards lately. So yeah, it's hard to be hopeful about things and to not think that in this kind of situation we're in now, that yes, it's an opportunity for people to reimagine the world, but it's also a time when some societies are restricting or exerting more and more control over their citizens and taking the opportunity to kind of just entrench things to be a bit more even the way they are, to remain more entrenched the way they are. So I don't know. I'm not as optimistic as he was, but I think it's something that what I did learn from making the film was that it's kind of a muscle that you need to exercise, your hope or your optimism, and that there's value in doing that. And when you do that, there is change that can happen. And we've seen in the past, movements can change things, and civil rights and everything. There is progress being made, and you just have to get out of that bubble of despair. I think of it a bit how when I get overwhelmed with how things are, sometimes it just makes you kind of it deflates you, and you're you're like, oh, well, what can we do? And you just shrug. Whereas my dad really asked that same question, like, what can we do? But in a way that was like, okay, what will we do? And what are we going to do? And what step can we take? And it's maybe overwhelming to think of like trying to make the whole world better. But like, what little step can you take that will make things a little bit better for a few people, and starting with that and not trying to think about the huge, overwhelming state of things.
Yes, I think generations younger than your dad, our generations are much more cynical, and the generations that are coming after us are even more cynical. But maybe this is why it is really important to. I mean, we are definitely. It definitely feels like we are heading in a dystopian direction, not utopian. But I think that's really why we should still hope, because this is the only way to fight it. And yeah, you get deflated, you get disappointed, you get angry, you get sad. But yeah, this I suppose is these kinds of feelings are what in the first place pushed people like Thomas More or St. Brendan to go looking for this utopia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the more you can find ways, moments of progress or of hope within that despair cloud, it can be contagious. And I think that's what Peter's work was about, was just helping more and more people make their films, which are going to be seen by more and more people, and that just that little bit of impact that it could have in someone's day if they watch a film that does kind of open their eyes to something and give them a sense of what they might do about it, then that it's just like little drips of progress.
Yeah. Okay, I have some more questions from the audience. This one seems to be about your editing process. It says, what structure defined your choice of the sequence of shots?
Well, it was very intense. I've worked on the film for 5.5 years. I took a break for 2 years in the middle where I didn't work on it at all, but there was still, I would say, at least if I put it all together, all the little bits, probably 2 years of editing. And that's like with a foot project I didn't have to film. It was all, found footage. So it was all editing in a way, except for the interviews that I did. But I worked with 2 different editors over, one at the beginning of the process and one at the end. And so the end was, or the last year, I guess, was the most intensive. Once I had a better sense of what the film was going to be, we basically just tried a million structures. Like there were certain things that I knew I kind of wanted it to be, like there was kind of like 3 films a bit intertwined. Like there's a film about utopia and about hope, and then there's a film about my dad and his journey, and then there's the film about our relationship. And each of those 3 films kind of had to dance together and have their own ups and downs, and then also kind of be leading us towards some kind of resolution or understanding or something. So it was really challenging to try to weave them all together and figure out which ones were important when, and what to leave out of the film. Because like my dad's, especially trying to capture my dad's life, capturing someone's life in 88 minutes is not possible, especially like he just did so much. So like I tried to squeeze in the fact about him inventing this like virtual film festival, but there was like so many other things like that I had just left out because they became distracting, or it was just too much to juggle. But yeah, we just kind of started. We had a board, with all the different scenes with post-it notes, colored post-it notes that we put up, and tried a million things. It's like a puzzle that you don't know what it looks like and you don't know what it should look like, and you're just trying things out. And every time you move one thing from here, it works over here now, but whatever you moved it away from all falls apart. Like it was just it was really a process of trial and error. I didn't really want to go in with like a sense of like, this is the story I need to tell, this is the structure, the story beats, and this is what it's going to be. I wanted it to be a bit more intuitive, and because it was such a personal, just like emotional process too, so I wanted it to be pretty organic in terms of just figuring it out as I went along, rather than thinking it through too intellectually as a creative like story. It's a bit more just allowing it to be more personal and intuitive, and trying stuff out. And it took forever, and it was painful, but we finally got it to a place that we are happy with.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question from the audience. Let me just open it. So I think you partially answered this when you were talking earlier, but still maybe we can expand on it. So did you track the process of creation of Peter's film in the past? And if yes, did you use it for a more accurate interpretation while you were making your movie?
Oh, like what his film was supposed to be for this Utopia film?
Yeah, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, well, I found his original proposal. Like there was a document when he was trying to raise money for the film. So at one point, at the beginning, I think I was trying to kind of really use that as like a blueprint of what the film should be. But I mean, the thing is, I think a lot of the footage, because he never really got that much funding for it, I think a lot of the footage was like development footage he was shooting just to be able to show a broadcaster or someone what the idea would be. And then I think he planned to go back and reshoot for real, like in a more professional way with like tripods and things like that. So I didn't have the material to make that film. Also, I think he would have had a narration in the film. Like there was, in the proposal, there was like writing about how he was going to be this kind of guide through the film, but I just didn't have any of that, like his meta, like narration about where he was. I didn't know why he was in most of these places. And I didn't, or sometimes I would find details in the proposal, but there was no way to communicate that in the film without me telling the audience what I read. But I didn't want to ever be like the expert voice in the film. I mean, in the first draft of my film, I was kind of like an expert voice talking about all these things I learned about Utopia by Googling them or whatever, and or reading about it. And it just felt like it felt dishonest because I didn't know any of that stuff, before I started making the film. I'm not an expert on this. It felt strange for me to be sort of teaching people about utopias and these places he went to. So I tried to make it a film a lot more, to get away from that original film and make it more about a quest for understanding and just me searching for answers rather than having any answers, because I didn't.
Yeah, that's really important. I also find it when I'm trying to write about something and then I start doing research, and then because all this information is so readily available, I'd like to include this very much and show it as my knowledge. But then, yeah, it's dishonest. It doesn't. Then it doesn't feel right when you see it. Yeah.
Right, and it's just hard to convey too. It's like, well, I Googled this, and like it's just not interesting to hear about someone like Googling things.
Yeah. It's not like very exciting. Yeah.
There's one scene in the film where I do have to do that a bit because I talk about St. Brendan, who I didn't know anything about, but I literally just found the book that my dad had, and you see the book in the film, and I'm like, oh, I found that book, and this is what it says about him. So it felt a bit more natural that way. But.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. Okay, and all right. So now, after you've made this film, and I will meanwhile ask our friends at DOCU Days if there are more questions from the audience to send to me, because I don't see the YouTube channel. And meanwhile, I will ask you. So now after you having made this film, and which was clearly a big thing for you, a lot of work, and it wasn't easy. Do you feel like making more films? I mean, you started with a really tough one.
Yeah. I really enjoyed as hard as it was, I did really enjoy this process of like making a film. But I really liked working with the archives and not having to film anything at the same time. So, because I don't like to be in front of a camera, and I like working in sound because it's really intimate. When I'm recording someone, there's just a mic. They can be themselves a lot more easily than if there's a camera there. So I don't think I would make a film in that sense where I would film something with someone or like put someone in front of a camera. But I like the idea of doing another film where I either use found footage again somehow, or animation, or because I really tried to treat this film more as a sound piece. Like all the story is happening in sound and the visuals are another layer, but the content of the emotional content is mostly in the sound, I think. And I didn't have to film anything. So I like that way of working, of maybe doing another film where the storytelling is happening in sound, maybe just with audio interviews, and then finding another way to build the images with found footage or animation or photos, or I don't know. But I do really love working in radio too. It's just like the intimacy of it, and just it's so much cheaper than having to raise money for a film, and more manageable in a lot of ways. So it depends on the story. I think some stories, I think this story needed to be told as a film because like the footage, I just had all that footage and all these visual elements that Peter was drawn to. So if I have another story that I want to tell where there is that need for visuals, I'm definitely interested in exploring that too.
Yeah, found footage is, I find, very exciting form, and a lot of really good films. I'm not a filmmaker, but I'm sure it takes a lot of work and a lot of, as you mentioned, that you were trial and error. And but sound is really, obviously, a very important aspect of film, and this is where what we usually call atmosphere or vibe comes from. Is primarily the sound.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is it that attracts you to sound?
Well, actually, I often say, some people say that it's like the most visual medium, and I tend to believe that because I think the visuals that you create in your mind are so personal. When you're hearing someone tell a story, it's really interactive, and if it's done well, you can really paint like a whole universe in your mind that will be better than could be better. It has the potential to be better than anything specific that you'll see because there's no limits, and it can become really anything that you imagine. So I like that aspect, and yeah, just the intimacy of just how when you're just listening to someone's voice, especially if you're listening with headphones, it's like this very private and personal experience, and can be the impact. I find the emotional impact can be even more intense than a film in that way. But at the same time, of course, there are so many beautiful films that are made where the directors or the team clearly spent so much time with the characters so that they become really comfortable in front of the camera. And there's some stories that they just have to be filmed because they're just like such a beautiful setting, or the character's face just says so much more than you could get in just the sound. So, there's give and take. But
yeah, we had another question from the audience, but I think you just answered it. It was about your future films. So if you can say something, but you've said it. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we are we've done pretty well so far. Let me see. Here is another question has arrived. Good. So it says, how important it is to remain more of a filmmaker than a relative when you are creating a movie like that? More of a filmmaker than daughter in this
right
case.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was important it's important to like have one of those shoes on each foot and hop between them. I don't know. I think I love films where it's clear why the filmmaker is making that film, and I don't really like films where that there doesn't seem to be any relationship or like reason why that particular person is telling me this particular story. I don't like films that pretend to be objective, or of course there's a place for that kind of like journalistic work as well, but I personally am more drawn to films where it's very clear what perspective we're embodying and who's telling the story and why they're telling us that story, rather than trying to erase those facts or those elements. But at the same time, like as I was making this film, of course, I did have to juggle those different roles. I mean, it was a tough film to make in the sense of making something personal to me that felt true to me. Like he can't respond to the film in any way. I can't interview him and ask him how he feels about these things that I'm bringing up in the film. So I had to keep that in mind and try to myself imagine what he would say and try to present somehow a balanced view of like what, just imagining like what felt fair to kind of include and in terms of my perspective, I guess. It was clearly a very personal film, and that's the film it needed to be, and I'm not trying to pretend it's balanced and that it shows all aspects of him. It's just very much my relationship with him. But I think when you don't take ownership of that role or that relationship in the film, when you're a filmmaker, usually it's still there. You are still a person with a perspective, and that's still informing all the decisions you make. So I prefer films that just kind of lean into that and acknowledge that and make it clear that this is a film made by a daughter about a father, and someone else could make a very different film about him, and it would also be true. It's just one angle.
Yeah, I think the objectivity is wrong question to ask, really. When it's not a purely journalistic thing dealing with one issue that needs to be explored and find some sort of truth. And in this sense, for me, it's each artist's subjective point of view is their objectivity, and then we can perceive it as such. So
at the same time, I guess, like, to answer also the other aspect of that question is, like, I still was thinking about it as a creative work and a film that I knew other people were going to watch. So it wasn't like I'm just not like just a diary. Well, I'm just doing whatever I want and putting only what makes sense to me. Like, I was definitely trying to think about it as a film that other people would watch, whether they knew him or not, like how to make it interesting for someone who did know him, who had a different relationship with him, or someone who's never heard of him, or someone who knows him through his films. And like, so I was definitely trying to think of it as a story and a construction, not just of like what is completely just me like barfing up my own feelings into a film, but like trying to craft it into something that would make sense so in those moments I did have to step back and think of it as a filmmaker who's like watching this story from a slightly different outside perspective.
And then maybe to turn this question around, and how did your family react to the film?
Yeah, I mean, well, so my mom saw a few drafts early on, and she was always very supportive of me making it the film I needed to make. But I think for her earlier on, especially in the earlier drafts, she always, she wanted it to be more funny, or just more, she could see, because she knew my dad, of course, so well, she could see all the elements that were missing that someone else maybe wouldn't see. Like, she could see just all the things that I couldn't include about all of his accomplishments. And so I think part of her, at first anyway, wanted it to be, or felt like a sense of loss for like not including all those things, or a sense of regret that people wouldn't be seeing all of those sides of him and all the other amazing things he did that I couldn't include. But at the same time, she was very understanding of that it was a very personal film, that I had to make it a certain way. And in the end, she's very happy with the film, and she sees a lot of like beautiful poetic connections that I didn't even make, that I didn't even put there on purpose, or that my editor and I didn't put there on purpose. I was working with Anouk Deschain, who was my editor in the second half. And and then I showed Peter's sister and my cousins, and they also were very touched by the film. I mean, it's hard to watch it if you're someone who knew and loved my dad. It's like it's a hard film to watch in a lot of ways, but at the same time, as I've shown it to friends of his at festivals, they sort of say thank you for letting me spend 90 minutes with Peter again after his death. So
yeah, okay. So what is right now? Okay, I suppose your film will go to more online events.
Yeah.
And do you have maybe? Did you plan to release it in cinemas? I mean, I guess you would have wanted to, but do you have a distributor? And
the production company that I was working with, I Still Film, is also a distributor, and we're working with Cat and Docs, also a distributor in Europe, and the NFB is another production, is distributing it in Canada. And so yeah, we were planning to do a theatrical release in Canada anyways after the festivals, but now everything seems a bit up in the air. So hopefully a few more festivals. And then I don't know, I guess we'll have to see. We're taking things one day at a time of how everything unfolds. I mean, it's lovely to be able to do the online screenings, but I would really love to do a couple more like cinema screenings at some point if we can, at least in Canada, with like so many of his friends here, because we haven't we played in one smaller festival in Canada in the north, but there's so many cities in Canada where he has so many friends that haven't been able to see it yet. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Well, these I've come to realize that these online events are very nice, and they can really help your film reach a lot of people. But then again, this one really important element, and this is like a communal viewing together on a big screen, is missing. But yeah, I think we'll be able to use this to kind of complement, hopefully, some normal kind of cinema and festival life.
Yeah, no, it's great to be able to talk about it. I just hope that when people are streaming them at home, they're still pretending they're in a cinema and they're turning their phones off and they're not like checking Twitter while they're watching it.
That's a bit utopian, I think.
Yeah, I can hope.
Yeah. Okay, Mira, thank you very much. And I'd like also to thank everybody who watched. Please stay with DocuDays for more films and more talks like this. And we are wrapping up now. And goodbye, everybody. Thank you, Mira.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.